I am Elizabeth Hemings. They called me Betty, the forgotten matriarch of Monticello. For centuries, my story has been buried in silence. Today, I will speak for myself. I was the mother of Sally Hemings, but before her story, there was mine. I was born around 1735. I lived through enslavement, became a mother many times over, and endured the same exploitation my daughter Sally later suffered. My story reveals how slavery carved trauma into generations of women whose names were nearly erased. I was the daughter of an enslaved African woman and a white sea captain. From the moment I drew breath, I was bound to a system that denied my humanity and turned my body into property. As a young woman, I became the property of John Wayles, Thomas Jefferson's father-in-law. My descendants have told the truth. John Wayles fathered several of my children. This was not love. This was not romance. It was exploitation disguised as ownership, a master exercising what he believed was his right.
Welcome to Burden of History, where truth isn't just told, it's restored. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, thank you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that button so you don't miss the stories history tried to bury.
At just 15 years old, I gave birth to my first child. I would eventually bear at least 12 children, many likely fathered by the man who owned me. Among them was Sally Hemings, who, like me before her, would be forced into a relationship with the man who enslaved her. The cycle was already written. When John Wayles died in 1773, I and my children were inherited like furniture, passed to his daughter Martha. Through Martha's marriage to Thomas Jefferson, my family arrived at Monticello. At Monticello, I became the matriarch of one of the most significant enslaved families in Virginia. My children and grandchildren filled the skilled roles that kept the plantation functioning: carpenters, seamstresses, chefs, and personal attendants. Here lies the cruelest truth: history repeated itself with surgical precision. Just as I was exploited by John Wayles, my teenage daughter Sally was coerced by Thomas Jefferson. 2 generations of women, mother and daughter, trapped in the same cycle of silence and assault. I had served the Jefferson household for years, caring for Thomas Jefferson as part of my enslaved duties. I watched him grow from boy to man. And then that same man, the one I had tended, the one I had served, turned his attention to my child. I died in 1807 at Monticello, still enslaved after more than 70 years in bondage. I was buried in an unmarked grave, my resting place, like so many others, deliberately forgotten. My story forces you to see slavery not just as chains in cotton fields, but as a generational cycle of assault, silence, and survival carved into the lives of women whose names were nearly erased. I spent decades serving the Jefferson family with skill and care. And yet, I lived to see my own daughter become the object of the same man's abuse. The betrayal was complete. The cycle was unbroken. Before you remember my daughter Sally Hemings, you must remember me, Elizabeth Hemings. I survived bondage. I raised 12 children. I served with quiet dignity, only to watch the man I once cared for exploit my daughter. Her story is not just about survival, it is about a cycle of betrayal and silence written into the very DNA of America. Elizabeth Hemings's life reminds us that behind every founding father were women whose names were nearly erased, but whose suffering and strength must never be forgotten. Now pause for a moment. Close your eyes and picture Monticello, not the pristine monument that tourists visit today, but the plantation as it truly was. Hear the clatter of tools, the whisper of chains, the quiet sobs swallowed in darkness. Imagine being me, serving the man who would later abuse my daughter. Imagine being Sally, knowing your mother had already walked this path of pain. Imagine the weight carried by my family, day after day, year after year.
This was hard for me to listen to, and I hope it was not triggering for you. This story took place centuries ago, but it still hurts to read about it. I sometimes put myself in the subject's place, and I have to be honest. I often have to take a break. But these voices matter. If this story moved you, please share it. These women were never meant to be remembered, but together we can make sure they are never forgotten. Subscribe for more stories that history tried to bury, because truth matters, and it must always be restored.